close, the war in Vietnam showed no signs of a quick solution. A visit by American President Lyndon Johnson was greeted with massive protests at the Australian government's decision to go all the way with LBJ in the war effort. Johnson was here at the invitation of Prime Minister Harold Holt, who, in 1967, drowned in heavy surf at Portsea in Victoria. His body was never found. Scores of people also drowned in New Zealand when onlookers stood helplessly on the shore as the ferry Wahine sank in cyclonic conditions in Wellington Harbour after striking a reef. But from tragedy to triumph when in July 1969 the world watched in amazement when Neil Armstrong became the first man to set foot on the moon. The same year, Australia produced another world boxing champion. Jean-Pierre Famechon was a boxing blue blood who fought like the Scarlet Pimpernel, darting here, there and everywhere behind a rapier jab. His father and two uncles were famous fighting men too. Famo was born in Paris in 1945 and came to Australia in 1950 with his father Andre. Ray Connolly remembers that Andre only wanted his son to learn self-defence, not take on the family business.
His own dad said to me once, Andre, oh, what a fierce fighter he was. Hard, tough. He was warlike in the way that he used to absorb blows. He said, my boy, he said, I wish he'd not fight. He said, he'd not punch hard enough.
But Famo was keen to earn a quid. Under trainer Ambrose Palmer, he developed into a ring artist. Now, recovering from an horrific accident, Famo recalls his first boxing hero.
There was one person by the name of Max Carlos, whom I enjoyed seeing, and he was trained by Ambrose Palmer also.
In 1964, Famo won the Australian featherweight title against Ollie Taylor, and over the next 3 years dismantled some classy opposition: Billy Mayles, Noel Kundi, Max Murphy and Giovanni Gigenti. In 1967 he was matched here with big punching American Don Johnson.
He is a very powerful man for his weight, and the young Australian nearly makes an early mistake by trying to trade punches at close quarters.
How was that for sidestepping a problem? Famechon's magnificent reflexes, fast hands and fabulous footwork left Johnson hitting air. And in Paris in 1968, fighting in the city of his birth for the only time in his career, Famo outsmarted the tough local René Rock.
René Rock was the French lightweight champion, which led the promoter give me a title shot against Jose Legra. He came from London to Paris to see the fight.
In Sydney, Famo's brilliance befuddled the American Bobby Valdez.
At this stage, Valdez is behind on points, but he's still fighting strongly.
And when the Aussie maestro jumped in with the flashy Cuban Jose Legra in London on January the 21st, 1969, Famo was almost impossible to nail. At stake, the featherweight championship of the world. Legra had 54 consecutive wins, and the betting shops made him 5-1 on. But Famo was determined.
There's the bell. What a title fight it was. What a title fight. Famechon has won the World Featherweight Championship.
I had a job to do, and I knew what the prize would be if I won. The world's your oyster if you won. So seeing that I enjoy oysters, I went for it.
Famechon and Ambrose Palmer returned home in triumph, and with Lionel Rose holding the world bantamweight crown, Australia now had 2 world champs at the same time. On July the 28th, 1969, Famechon made his first defence of the WBC featherweight title against Japan's Fighting Harada. It was a night of controversy. Willie Pep, the referee and sole judge, and, no doubt overawed by the occasion, mucked up his scoring. First, he declared the bout a draw. Famechon had hit the canvas 3 times. Harada's handlers protested and the crowd booed. Pep's scoring was checked at ringside and it was discovered that he'd made a terrible blunder, but not the one that most imagined. He had Famechon winning by a point. Famo had retained his title. All arguments about the outcome were settled 6 months later in Tokyo when Famo came down off his twinkle toes and ended Harada's career with a barrage of heavy punches. Famo was world champ for 20 months until he lost a close one in Rome to Mexican southpaw Vicente Saldivar in a disputed decision. Having reached the pinnacle of his profession and with a hefty bank balance, Johnny Famechon retired, never to come back. He left a legacy of boxing artistry and class that has rarely been seen since. The late 1960s belonged to Rose and Famechon, but Bobby Dunlop even had Kerry Packer ringside to see him batter young McCormick for the Empire Light Heavyweight title in 1968. It was a hard fight, especially for McCormick, as Dunlop discovered a couple of years later.
When I went over to London to Solomon's gym there, and I had a look around there and I made inquiries and how to get in touch with John McCormick. They gave me an address and I went round and knocked on the door, and this bloke comes to the door, grey, his hair's just completely grey, and says, "John McCormick home?" He said, "I am John McCormick." Oh, jeez, I couldn't believe it.
The Empire title capped a rapid rise for Dunlop. He was a good boxer and not afraid to mix it, as he did beating American heavyweight Levin Roundtree. He was also superbly fit, as Ern McQuillan Jr. recalls.
Bobby was a fanatic for fitness. You never had to push him. He was a council worker and he worked with a pick and shovel and he worked just as hard in the gymnasium.
Dunlop fought good imports like Texan Elmo Henderson, seen here.
I think it was around 6 or 7, and everyone all sort of barred me, and it hit me on the chin, and down I went, and I got up at about 3, and I standing there with my hand on the ropes, and the referee counted me out. So I was quite angry about that, and we had an altercation in the dressing room. I tried to get hold of him and punch his lights out, but they got the police and all sorts of drama. So they arranged for me to fight him again, and I just punished him. I stood on his feet and elbowed him and done all sorts of terrible things to him,
Dunlop was also especially proud of his victories over Sydney gangster and standover man Roy Thurger, beating him in the ring and in a street fight in front of the Coogee Bay Hotel. Under Ern McQuillan, Dunlop became the world's number 3 light heavyweight. In 1969, Jose Torres, the great Puerto Rican world champ, visited Sydney.
The Puerto Rican hasn't been in the ring for 10 months, but he shows devastating punching power right from the first round.
Overweight and supposedly washed up, Torres sprung a huge surprise on Dunlop on April Fool's Day 1968. Bobby was the odds-on favourite, but Torres made a mockery of the market. Dunlop tried to shake Torres early, and it was a big mistake. Bobby was always vulnerable to hard overhand rights, and that just happened to be Torres's favourite punch. Dunlop fought on for another couple of years, but could never regain his brilliant early form. By the age of 24, he had retired.
Welcome.